That is basically what I tell people all the time. You're not. It's not luck. It's hard work. I don't know
It's
why people have a
preparation.
hard time. Yeah, it's preparation. I don't know why people have such a hard time grasping that. And here's the other thing: like if you prepare 100%, if you prepare all your life, then you don't really have the need to worry. It's baffling. It baffles me that people don't understand that very simple concept and they splurge like there's no tomorrow. I've had friends who were from the Philippines who spent like there was no tomorrow. I'm like, you came from a much harder working household than I did. Okay, so we're off. And talking about wealth and poverty and everything else in contrast to other countries. We had this conversation before. We kept talking about how one of the things that you said is that the U.S. has it better than everyone else in retrospect of where the people with lower incomes gets to live a pretty standard life everywhere else around the world. And yeah, we
Well,
we
with
got
that
we
being
you know we
said, I at the same time don't want to invalidate people's concerns, because I
right.
mean, something, somebody's life's opinion and thoughts are valid, but looking at it from a more objective point of view, like looking at human history from like 4000 BC to now, we've made vast progress. And although our difficulties are valid and true, it's not to the level as some of those in the past. Like in the United States, for example, I think a really good indication that we've made it is the fact that um, you don't necessarily have to worry about food. And what I mean by that is, back in the day, the norm was poverty and being impoverished. Like you don't have enough food to eat. But now, in the United States in particular, it's a lot more common to be on the bigger side than it is on the smaller side, because there's this abundance of food and calories that one can participate in, even though they might not be economically strong. And so,
Mhm.
like just that idea shows that we've made it in the United States, anyways. We've had a pretty good system that people can afford that luxury, that problem. And although it is a problem, it's a luxury to have that problem, to be honest.
My issue with that is that when you count it in terms of calories, and when you count it in terms of people who are obese, like in a lot of places, you'll have people who are obese and overweight, right? But it's not necessarily because they have the right nutritions that they need. I mean, you have to think like fast food is very cheap, right? And you get the calories that you need. I think being overweight, like having being overweight is kind of a good thing before because you get all the nutrition that you need, you get all the energy, and you are basically able to function. Whereas in modern society, it kind of doesn't reflect that. It becomes more like a plague, kind of, and it becomes more of a status of like think about it right now. It's much more expensive to be healthy and to be fit than it is to be overweight. It's easier to have access to fast food and things that are easy to consume and things that are very dangerous for you than it is to find things that are healthier and have more nutritional value. And it's also harder to be have the time, like to be able to have the time to get up and to be able to walk around and have the amount of daily movement and activities that you need. Don't you think it's kind of reversed like today? It when you think about that.
Well, regarding the nutrition that you were saying, I would actually disagree with that. Um, so I think what's primarily happening is that the foods out there, like what's happening is the food that we have now is just so good. Like it tastes really good. We're talking about fast food, and the reason why it's part of its success is it does taste really good. But imagine if you were in the back of the day, let's say, and then you have all the food in the world. You have all the bananas and apples and all those that healthy food. What's gonna happen is those foods taste great, right? They taste good, but they do not taste as good as fast food. So let's say you have all the bananas that you could have. What's going to happen is once you ate enough bananas, you're going to stop. You're going to be like, okay, I'm full. Like that's like there's something in your body, in your brain that's going to say that, okay, like this is enough. And so that's like what helps limit that goodness, I guess. But now what's happening is some of the food that we have tastes so good that you still want to eat even though you were already full. I think primarily speaking, that's the majority of those issues. People would eat even though they are technically full. Like, I think biologically speaking, there's just been so much evolution that because if that is the case, that healthy foods like if one has all the money in the world and it can buy all this healthy food, like they'd be big as well, like even in those other times. And there has been exceptions of those, but generally speaking, that doesn't really happen. And I think an example of that when I'm thinking about it is Europe. In Europe, it's not as big of a problem. It exists, but it's not as big of a problem because I guess there's just, and to be honest, I'm thinking about it now in Great Britain, like their food isn't that great. Isn't as tasty, to be honest. And I think there's that like bodily limitations. Well, in the US, there's been a lot of really, really good food. And like for example, I'm thinking about it as a Cheesecake Factory. So like a slice of that is like almost 1,600 calories for one slice. And you don't just want one slice, right? Like that's even dessert. Like you're going to eat something on top of that. And so what happens is you're able to eat more than your body probably would say that's like it's enough. And like regarding cheesecake, now that I'm thinking about it, it tastes so good that you want to eat more than you really your body needs. And so like regarding those nutritions also, like the 2,000 calories really isn't that much. And I'm thinking also how if one is to eat like all those negative foods, let's say, right? But if they also try to work out, like it kind of evens out, I'm pretty sure. I think generally speaking, it's in addition to eating too much as well as not doing enough physical exercises or physical works that it becomes a problem. Because like how is it in the Philippines? Like, is that problem even a problem, or is that kind of looked as like that's kind of a good thing to have?
I'm trying to think with what you said. I'm trying to remember what our professor said. So Professor Gail Pooley, he was our economics professor, and one of the things were you able to take one of his classes? One of the things that he always taught was that we have so much abundance of things today, and that he argues in his book. So if you read the book Superabundance, he co-authors with Mark Tuppy, and they argue that everything is cheaper today when you think of the number of hours that you've had to work. Now, for example, if you wanted to have a bike back in Grandpa's time, you probably had to work 6 hours or 8 hours to be able to get that bike. Whereas today, in terms of earning power, it's become cheaper because you only need to work like 3 or 2 hours to be able to get that bike. And in a lot of things, I do think that a lot of things has become cheaper because number one, we've really started to branch out. We've become more open with other countries. We've had more relationships. Countries are able to specialize in doing what they do best. And we're able to connect people through online, through markets that wasn't readily available before. And we've had a very structured system. Was it Adam Smith, I think, was the one who came up with the concept of the invisible hand, where everything just kind of falls into place and everything is able to work together. So I think that it does become cheaper for everything. And with what you said about food, before you'd have one country to supply their own needs. It doesn't matter. They might not specialize in that thing, but because they didn't really trade, they had to work hard, and it takes up a lot of resources and a lot more effort. It's less efficient. So with this opening up with other countries, it becomes much more efficient and much more cheaper in a lot of ways. The thing And the thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around is that there's this one thing I've read his book, and it seems to apply with all materials. I seem to have problem with grasping the concept of rent and with mortgages and housing. That's the one thing that I've had such a disconnect with. Well, what is your opinion of that? Like, people keep showing graphs of like, okay, rent's become like 38 times more expensive than it was 50 years ago, and income hasn't really doubled. Well, what's your take on that?
Well, so I think from okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you're asking about how mortgage and rent kind of relates with people's income.
Right, because that's one of the things that has kind of pretty stayed stagnant over the years, or like has
Yeah.
constantly been going up.
So we were just talking about earning power, and you were mentioning about the bike, where generally speaking, now it would require less time, less hours of work to be able to afford that bike. Well, in the case of housing has increased more than the earning power.
Hmm.
So back then, let's say it would take about maybe 2.5, 3 years for you working, and then
Hmm.
like let's say a house is worth like $200,000, and then like your income would be like like it takes about 3 years for you to pay that. Like if you had your whole gross income, so like 200,000 divided by three, it's about like 6.8, 6.9.
Hmm.
So or like 69,000 or so. Um, that would be your income. But now it would take like maybe 5, 7 years to pay off that house. Really, like, and just to clarify, like mortgages normally takes 15 to 30 years, but like that's the problem that a lot of people are having compared to maybe their grandparents or parents. It does take a lot more time and effort to be able to officially own a house. However, my thing with that, and you mentioned about rent, right now in the year 2025, it makes a lot more sense renting over buying a house, because the
Really?
difference, like just as a general rule, a mortgage, like when you're actually owning a house, the mortgage is the minimum you'll be paying per month, while in rent, if you're a renter, the rent is going to be the maximum you'll be paying per month, generally speaking. And so now we got to like figure out like what the difference is. If you're going to be normal, if you're going to, and generally speaking, if you're going to have a house, if you're going to have a mortgage on a house, let's say 2,000 square foot, these are just numbers I'm pulling out. Um, it's going to be, let's say, like $2,500. But then if you were to rent that same house, it would have been, let's say, like 1,800.
Hmm.
And that difference of $700, you got to think about what that opportunity cost would be. If it's better to have put that $700 in the stock market, or it would have been better to actually be having that house. And generally speaking, if you have to do the math on it with so many different nuances on it, generally speaking, it's better now to rent. But I think also it's just like the college issue, I think, that's happening in the United States, where everybody is expected to go to college after high school, and then
Hmm.
let's say they're studying something that the return on investment is not that great. Maybe they're, I don't know, in college for 4 years um, for makeup or basket weaving, right? Like that's not a great return on investment. And the same way, we gotta start looking at it now and being more honest, and like just looking at the math in terms of owning a house. It's the same thing, I think, where there's a lot of marketing towards everybody needs to go to college, everybody needs to go to college, and now it's the same thing where everybody needs to own a house. You don't necessarily need to own a house. Like, first of all, it's not a human right, and what I mean by that, although I respect like the ability, the constitutional rights, generally speaking, of life,
Right.
liberty, and property, uh, you don't, like, you can rent somewhere, you can live somewhere else, but you don't necessarily have to own that place. And the idea behind it is like, what if it becomes a right, then somebody has to give it to you, You're gonna have to
Right.
force somebody to give it to you. And in this case, I don't want builders or electricians, plumbers. Like, I don't want to force their labor so that I can own something. I don't think that's right. Um,
Where do you think we got the idea that housing was a human right as well as other basic necessities? Like we understood, it seemed to me like before we understood the principle that your only rights were to life, liberty, and property. But it seems like the farther we go, it seems like, oh yeah, we should have the right to have our needs met. Like for example, for college, wasn't there a bill that was about to be passed that says, hey, we're gonna pay for everyone's college tuition,
oh,
and we're
I'm
also
not
gonna
familiar
do
with that
government.
bill, but sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, but like for me, it's like I was just thinking, like, why do you think we've evolved to start to think that the needs that we have were our basic human rights, and
Oh,
with regardless of who pays for it?
I think this comes down to privilege, and it's gonna sound awful uh, for me saying this, but I think it just comes down to privilege, in which a lot of people don't recognize what is the standard of the world. So a lot of people in the United States, I believe, have lived in a life filled with luxury. And what I mean by luxury is the fact that I know that you can drink water out of the faucet. I remember growing up, uh, we were taught to never, ever, ever do that, because in the Philippines, that's just asking for problems. Well, in the United States, in a lot of places, like, you can just do that, and it's a common thing. And there's a lot of really basic luxuries. Oh, an example again is, I remember coming to the U.S. and seeing the sidewalk. I remember seeing the sidewalks. They were so clean and like very like almost made by a machine, and it looks really organized. And I'm just thinking back to how I saw the Philippines at the time. It wasn't as clean as that, and I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. Or there's AC, right? Like, there's these really basic amenities that we say basic in the U.S., but in other standards of the world, it's luxury. And I think we gotta put it on pause and just try to have that recognition of where we are in this time and space, that we have so much luxuries to us. I remember, like, it took me, and me saying this like I'm not a victim, but like I think I started having a smartphone when I was in junior year. But a lot of people already started having it like in their freshman year. And especially now, I think a lot of kids at like elementary school are having smartphones. And like these smartphones that we have has so much technology on it, and with AI, like, you can really learn anything and everything you want just with your phone. And so we're in this interesting time where we can learn anything and everything, but at the same time, because there's so much options out there, it
Hmm.
becomes difficult to choose what is a good option. Kind of reminds me in where I learned, I think in high school, where we were talking about, like, it's really interesting. It's the problem of the choices or something like that,
Right.
where now there's so many choices in terms of smartphones, in terms of like drinks, food, that you get into a position where you are in decision paralysis, meaning that there's so many options, you don't know what to choose. You might even be researching one option after another option after another option, and then because there's so many options, you're not really able to choose. And it would have been better if you just chose like one, just a random option in a way. And so, uh, like, we're in this great time, and I kind of want to relate this back to like the housing stuff. I think also what's happening with our particular generation is that people don't want to move. Actually, when I think about it,
Hmm.
and forgive me if I'm going to say anything wrong here, because I'm just spitballing some ideas. I'm thinking about it as back then, when there's an opportunity, like maybe from somebody from the East Coast that has an opportunity to get better pay and things like that, like, but they have to go to California.
Right.
Like, they would probably take that, or like vice versa, from California to New York City or Florida or whatever. And it was a lot harder back then to do that as well. you know.
Right.
But now, technically, you can. I mean, it costs money for sure, right, to travel, but in comparison to other time periods, we're in a pretty luxurious time period where we can do that fairly easily in comparison to other times. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think also there's that level of what's the word, like maybe pride, where
Mm-hmm.
like for example, like you don't want to move for that better opportunity because you want your house here. I think an example of this is in Utah, Provo and Salt Lake City are like two of the major cities that the real estate is pretty high on. Like it's pretty desirable because there's so much stuff happening on both, right?
Right.
And with that being said, people don't really want to be more, outside of that, to be closer to a price range that they can afford. And like that's just a trade-off though. When you think about it, like you could have, and this is like goes with anywhere, right? Like you could be in a less desirable area, but then in that less desirable area, you can have like a house that's even bigger and cheaper. You have more land, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
compared to what's already established. And there's, I think that frustration. I get this frustration where like, well, you have work in Salt Lake City, for example, but like you can't live there maybe because like it's this difficult to have like a house that you want there, and
Right.
so it's frustrating that you have to like settle for something else. But I think there's that reality with the fantasy of what we would love to have, and you just gotta mesh it all together, and sometimes it requires sacrifice. In the case, like when I think about it, if the opportunity is good enough, you will do anything and everything in your power to move. I say that because like in comparison to how I think about it with my parents immigrating us to the United States, they actually went to the United States first for like 6 months, I think 6 or a
Mm-hmm.
year, like I can't remember too well, but they were testing the waters. And then it's like, okay, so this place is actually like probably pretty good for our children to have. So then after that, then like they started shipping us over. So I mean, if the opportunity is good enough, and I think with the ease of transportation, and there's things called U-Haul, you can do it yourself at a cheaper rate in terms of moving. There's really no excuse in the United States. Like every time I say this, like it's prefaced with the United States, generally speaking, because when I compare that to like the Philippines, like
Right.
there's just so much awesome things here, but at the same time, because it does get comfortable and I can feel it myself, like maybe you're in a good spot in your life, you kind of don't, maybe that kind of hinders your ambitions to do more. I just feel like if one was ambitious enough, like they're able to understand that maybe working 45, 50, 55, 60, 80 hours a week, it's doable and it's not necessarily going to kill you. Like it really depends, but I think in that point of view, there's just so much opportunities out there. um I mean, I think about it in terms of the Philippines. Like I don't necessarily have to worry about corruption to the level of the Philippines. It's a great thing that in the United States we're able to criticize the presidency, our governors. Like we're able to criticize those people and not go to jail for it.
It's
Or
interesting that you said that because, like, I just read a news article here that whenever we protest or whenever news reports would kind of broadcast about these protests, there are threats where police would come looking for them and has starts to send them to jail. And so we don't have that freedom of speech here. It's written in our constitution, it's written in our laws. And I think that's what is so great about the United States. In comparison to the Philippines, I don't know about other countries, but we don't have the strong enforcement of the Bill of Rights here. I read it. I was like, there's like a good amount of our rights in our constitution that we are supposed to have as a people, that cannot be enforced, or that is not strongly enforced, and that we have a government who has this control over the military. That base it's funny that we have it's funny that we have a democracy, but it feels more like a dictatorship when you really start to break those laws. And in the US, when I see that, I see people fighting and posting online. I see people going out in the streets protesting. And it's there's a lot of things that people say that are controversial, that go against the majority of the people, but you don't see them getting arrested for it. You don't see them going to jail for it. They are free to express their opinion, and I think that's a big thing and a big privilege to have, that uh, people seem to be misguided on. And it's interesting. People voice out their opinions online, and they also want to voice out that there should be censorship on some things, which is kind of ironic to me.
Well, I think one of, like you were mentioning about the protests in the United States. Um, I think there's a difference now with the protests back then, like a real civil rights protest, compared to what is happening now, where I think there's a lot of protesters that, like, for example, like blocking the road, but then they're not really helping their cause. Rather, I almost feel like they're trying to find, oh man, this is gonna sound bad, but I almost feel like they're trying to find a cross to be to be nailed on. Because what's happening is, let's say I saw those stories in California where people are protesting in the streets, and then there's a huge traffic that's piled on. It's like, well, the people that are on those highways that are going to be late for X, Y, and Z,
Right.
they, like, who knows whatever political affiliation they are in, but like that's not the way to do that protest. I think a lot of people, like, that's just not the way to do it, because you're putting a lot of third parties in the way, and it becomes a problematic because they have other things to do as well. I see the comment sections in some of those protests where it's like, well, what if somebody needs to go from point A to point B and they need to be there fast? Like they just can't do anything. It becomes an issue where almost people are, what is it? It's I'm gonna summarize it as like a protagonist syndrome, where everybody thinks that they're the main protagonist, they're the main character of the story. Where when, like, there's other main characters out there, they gotta go from point A to point B. And regarding like those protesters, I think it's good to, like, we are able to protest and we're able to have that freedom of speech. But we also have to be careful, because like your freedom of speech to protesters should not impede myself going to work, for example, like in that
Right.
highway example. And it's really interesting because we say this as if it's like really basic, but in other parts of the world, that's really not the case. Like I remember hearing this where I'm trying to remember to summarize. It's like people are saying words is violence, right? And so I think people that say that words is violence is trying to justify violence against those words.
Mm.
An example of that, I think, is like Germany, where if you say anything in social media, you're allowed to criticize, supposedly, but like you're not allowed to criticize to a certain extent. And then it becomes problematic, and then people can actually go to your house and arrest you for it.
Wow.
Like, that's pretty crazy when we say it now, but I think the idea, like, I get where the intention is. The problem is, who is to decide what is that line? Like, even the United States, we have to a certain extent that level. For example, you can't scream fire in a crowded area.
Right.
You can't do that. Well, you can do it, but then you will be probably prosecuted. But in the case of, like, in Germany, like, you can't even criticize somebody. Oh, like, part of hate speech is like maybe disagreeing with somebody's pronouns or something of that extent. Like, so we're trying to equate words with violence, and I think what's happening is people, like particularly the government in that sense, is trying to justify their violence against those people's words, and especially in social media. I mean, thank goodness I didn't have social media until I was in like maybe junior year, more or less. And part of it is in my education, my teachers have always told us that everything that we put out in the internet is going to be there forever. And I think we kind of lost that. Either we lost that or people don't necessarily care. I think like there's a difference in there. And I think there's a loss of purpose with so much purposes that you can find everywhere and anywhere in the world. I mean,
Well,
but at the
yeah.
same time, do you think that's the biggest problem in the Philippines for why it's not progressing as well as it probably could?
No, it's probably not the biggest problem. There's a lot of different things that would affect it, and how the country is run and where the money basically goes, the type of people that we vote for, especially when we go to vote buying, and just creating a very very desperate people. I think the thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around is I want to be one of those people who says the government is at fault, but deep down inside, I also know that the people are also at fault. So you remember the last time when we talked about this, when we say something about vote buying, and you said that when people let their votes be bought, we're essentially saying that this is okay. And we've kind of built up on that over the years. And for the longest time, people have also been ignorant. They've not been doing their own research. They've there's a lot of things that we could be doing as a people to be more productive, but
Mhm.
we're just not doing it. And goes back to the fact of gratitude. Like, okay, so we our topic today resembles on gratitude, and to be able to say that, oh, you actually have it better than other people. How does that affect people in the Philippines? I don't want people to start having the mindset that we really are a third world country and that there's nothing that you can do, because I do see people who live in third world countries in the Philippines who live a pretty good life, and the majority of it all the time is you are able to do something about it. You're able to change the way you're able to change the way that you work. You're able to find better opportunities with the internet right now. It's very hard. It's very hard to have the excuse that you can't really learn and you can't really get a good education. It's hard to have the excuse that you can't find food. It's and it's hard because I see a lot of people who complain about having these needs that are not met, but they're also the same people who usually don't do anything about their lives, and their kids are just staying at home playing video games or mobile games or computer games. So
Yeah. Wait, so
that's
Chris, really quick, sorry, I just want to ask, how do you think pe- hmm, sorry, I want to make sure that I get this question correct.
yeah. Go ahead.
Um, like, what age or when do you think one should be 100% accountable for their life? Because, for example, a 3-year-old is not accountable for their life, like what they're learning, what they're doing, XYZ. A 4-year-old, like a 6-year-old, either. Like, what age or what coming to of age experience is it when that individual should be considered like 100% accountable?
So that's an interesting question because, all right, so it's an interesting question because there's the legal aspect of it, and then there's the trying to teach your children kind of aspect. If you ask me, the age where people should start becoming accountable for themselves is at 8 years old, because and the reason that I think that is because we are able to start thinking for ourselves and we're able to make decisions at that age. I don't think, however, I think it's the age where you start to learn what is right and wrong and whether you listen to your parents or not. And I would not recommend, however, I would not recommend that anyone try to put that in law to law. Like, uh, I I don't think that people should say 8 years old is the age of accountability, and therefore we we remove the burden of parenthood from people who are already 8 years old and above. I think parents have a lot to do with how you shape your children. So legally, the age of accountability in the Philippines is 18 years old, or actually, I think it's a little higher now. It's 21 years old,
Wait, what?
and yeah, what I'm basically getting at is that if you have good parents, if you are fortunate enough to have good parents who are teaching you values, then you should at least be at 8 years old know what is right from wrong, basically on the basis of whether you listen to your parents or not. If you have good parents and you choose not to listen to your parents, then that's kind of on you. But if and on the flip side, if you have bad parents, or if you have parents who don't really teach you, who don't really educate you, then it's hard, it becomes harder to set a certain age of accountability for people, because it should be what should have been at 8 years old, they already know whether to listen to you or not. But if you have bad parenting in the home, then your idea of right and wrong doesn't necessarily come from the parents. It comes from the world. It comes from everyone else around you and who you surround yourself with. And also at that point, you're trying to figure it out, which works and which doesn't. So it should be in a perfect ideal society where parents are present and they teach their children. They're able to teach their children at least at 8 years old. They already know what's right from wrong. I don't think there are some people who get older, pretty much up past their teenage years, or they still don't know what is right from wrong because the parents are not very involved in their life, and that causes a lot of major issues. I have friends right now who don't think that what they're doing is wrong. They just think it's kind of normal. They don't think it's wrong to drink too much, to smoke too much, even though it's been taught in their educational system that this is bad for you.
Well,
But
actually,
they still think,
sorry, I'm trying to insert myself here now.
yeah,
Where you were mentioning about like maybe drinking or smoking is too much, but like I think there's gonna be a difference between a moral right and wrong, and then there is like the legal right and wrong. I think I agree with you at the age of 8, but it was primarily more because of a religious
right,
idea that the right and wrong is what one can find, like what is right. One there's just like an awakening, a spiritual awakening potentially, or like
right.
a still small voice awakening where you're starting to find out. And so there is that, but there's still that learning that comes with it. But regarding like, if for example somebody's smoking too much, if it's not affecting them negatively, it's not necessarily wrong in the sense of like for the world, in comparison to like maybe something spiritual on it, because I'm reminded myself like where in psychology a problem is only a problem if it's affecting you negatively. Like if somehow or another that smoking actually helps somebody calm their nerves and makes them, maybe they're a lawyer or something, and they're able to do their lawyer things in a more
Right.
calm and professional manner, that's not necessarily a problem. I might disagree with it, um, but in terms of like a problem in the sense of like the action in the world, it's not a problem. It only becomes a problem when it's affecting them negatively, and if they can recognize it's a problem.
I mean, I
And
get
so,
that. Like,
like,
I
'cause I might
understand that
disagree
it's
with it. I might disagree with it, but it's not if it's gonna help them supposedly, in their particular goals. Then I might not agree with their goals. But if it's helping them get to that point, it's not necessarily a problem, um, in that sense. But I might have a moral issue with it.
I mean, at that point, when in terms of accountability for right and wrong, yeah, I just use it as a vague example, but I think basically what I'm trying to say is that it's hard to put an age on it, but as soon as possible, the moment that you're able to control your, like, it is so hard to put an age number on it. I think it's situational. If you are able to qualify to get, if you can get work and you can study and you're able to do all these things and you're able to make right choices to better your life, I think that's where the accountability basically starts. No one's if you're being forced to do bad things, then I can't really say that your accountability starts at that age. But if you had the choice between doing what is right, what is better for you, and what is worse for you, and you still constantly choose what is worse for you, then that's really when we get to say, like, that really is your fault. That's not your parents' fault. That's not your anyone else's fault. That is really you yourself, and you need to take responsibility for those kind of actions, because you at that age were given these options to do right or wrong, and basically you've had the choice. But yeah, you didn't. And so that's where I start to hold people accountable. I don't really put an age to it. I just ask them, okay, when did you what are you able to make the right decisions? Are you able to have these choices? Then it's basically you. And even today, like, it doesn't matter how far down the rabbit hole you've gone in. If you still have the ability to pull yourself out, and there's a lot of resources that allow you to pull yourself out in basically any kind of addiction or hole that you're in, then you should be able to improve and better your life. And I think that's one thing that we should remember. That's one thing that I think is an aspect of not self-pitying yourself. The more you self-pity yourself, and the more you tell yourself that you're the victim in every story, the more that you're able to not do anything about your situation. And that's the thing that kind of gets me. It's a worldwide problem. It's not just a problem in the US, it's also a problem in the Philippines, where people keep telling themselves that they cannot do anything about it, and they are in this deep situation where it's too late to get out. That's never the case, and it's never been more untrue than today, when information is in great abundance, with much easier access than we've had before. So my bottom line is basically to stop making excuses and to just do things. The more you make excuses, and the more you justify your ingratitude, or the more you justify that you should get what you deserve without working for it, the harder it is for you to basically live life. I mean, I remember a time where I kept self-pitying myself. I kept justifying my wrongdoings, and I basically never repented. That's a form of pride that we are warned against in the church. We are warned for not being humble. We are warned for basically puffing up ourselves and saying that we don't need to do anything because the world owes us something. We just get stuck in that hole forever, because you're surrounding yourselves with things that you cannot control, and then there's so much things that you can do. That's always been the basic message that we have for people, and that's my message for people in the Philippines. I've heard great stories about people who were treated the most unfairly by their government, and who had the most unfair circumstances, but they pulled themselves out of those situations because they grinded, they worked hard. They were not necessarily, like, you know classroom smart, but they were like street smart. They knew how to negotiate, they knew how to interact with people, and they basically constantly learned, and they trusted. They don't That's another thing. They don't rely on God. And not in the this is gonna be interesting. It's not in a bad sense. It's good to rely on God, but it's not good to be fully dependent on him and say, God's gonna take care of everything. God also wants you to work. He also wants you to get out of your situation and to do things better. Like, for the story that I constantly remember is that there's two. Do you know about the story? There's the story about two farmers, and it was a drought season, and both of them prayed for rain. One of them prayed and went to bed expecting that rain would happen. The other farmer prayed for rain. He got out his buckets. He got out his containers. What do you call those? He got out barrels, empty barrels. He set up he set up routes for water to go through to feed all of his plants. He he thought of ways of where water could reach all of his plants and to catch more water. Who do you think was more prepared in that situation? I think God is willing to help everyone, but how those blessings impact you is dependent on how hard or how prepared you are to receive those blessings. There are people who just pray for blessings, and there are people who prepare for blessings to happen. And those are the people that I see who constantly come out on top. It's
Mm,
not supposed to be, the scriptures don't teach us to rely on God alone. The scriptures teach us that there are things that we have to do on our end as well, so that when the blessings do come, we are able to get more out of them. You're able to get more bang for your buck, basically. And that's a thing that I think that people need to learn, especially in the Philippines. That's why I'm kind of frustrated that people would go to church, but then they never do the things that would supposedly help them and bless them. The promised
mm,
blessings in scriptures is that I, the Lord, am bound if you do what I say, and that there are certain commandments that are tied to certain blessings. If you keep those commandments, then you can expect these kinds of blessings. That's the thing that I think people miss out on a lot, and that they really don't get and misunderstand a lot. I think that the mentality of I deserve to have X, Y, and Z is not exclusive to the US. I think it also happens in third world countries, which is ironic because it shouldn't happen in third world countries. If you're in the poorest of the poor and you're living a terrible life and your family member are suffering, then you as the provider should not be slacking off. I'm frustrated when I see people drinking, who some of the people who buy the most drinks are among these poor household incomes, and they have families to feed, and I kind of feel sorry. It's not necessarily I it's good to be happy, but then what happens to your kids? What happens to your wife who's at home, who's trying to tend to them and who's worried about feeding those kids? How can you afford to be able to live a life of luxury when you have people that you need to provide for? That's something that is plaguing everyone, regardless of where you are, regardless of the economy, which continuously baffles me.
yeah. Well, I think putting it back to God, I think it's not a God problem. I think it's a misunderstanding of who and what God is problem. um, I mean, because we can understand why it's so easy to, like in that example, to just kind of fall asleep and after doing a prayer, falling asleep, and then kind of like expecting the rain to happen. And I think this is where, even if somebody doesn't believe in God, having this
Mhm.
understanding of like the Ten Commandments, and in particular, like word of wisdom, um, would bring that preparation from those general rules, let's say, um, prepares you to kind of excel at your potential. And kind of because you told that story, I want to share an interesting story, something similar to that, and I think
You're not
it
just
made a
copying my story, are you?
it's a different one
All right.
where the premise is about the same though, where it was like, let's say in Florida,
Mm,
and a hurricane's about to happen, it's going to flood the whole place. And there was an old man like in his house, and he doesn't want to leave. He doesn't believe in um, like the hurricane's going to happen, but God will protect him. So his
all right.
neighbor, when he's about to leave with his family, he's like, oh, hey neighbor, like I can go, and like you can come with us, we can like make sure that we're in a safer area. The old man says, no worries, God will protect me. So then the neighbors left, and then a couple hours later, the flood has started, and the old man is now on the rooftop of his house. And then a bunch of like navy people trying to help out other people. They're in their boats, and they saw him. They went up to him, it's like, hey, we're here, we can take you out, we can help save you. Then the old man says, no worries, God will protect me. So then, like, he didn't want any of their help. So then they had to go away because the storm was getting worse. So now the old man is like in his in the highest point of his rooftop, and everywhere else is just flooded. And for a third time, a helicopter rescue team is there. They have their ladders and they have their loudspeaker. It's like, we're here to help you. Like we come, like here's the ladder. Come and like take it. And the old man screaming up to them saying, no worries, God will protect me. And then the storm was getting too bad, so then they just had to go at that point. And then after a couple hours, the guy walks towards God and said, "Hey God, like I was praying and hoping that you would protect me. What happened?" And God said to him, "Like, my son, I tried to protect you 3 times." And so it's that idea. I think it's just a misrepresentation of what God is. Like you mentioned, he is for he's there to help everybody, even those that don't believe in him, because like I don't want to get to it too deeply, but like he believes in us so much that like Christ himself came down for everybody. But with that said, I think we kind of have to go back to the point of gratitude, where what signs have you been able to see in which your life is better than those of the previous generation?
So like in my life personally?
Yeah, in your situation.
Okay, so in my life, okay. My situation right now is I'm a college graduate earning earning more, earning a little. Yeah, earning a little. No, I'm not gonna disclose that. You know what? I hate disclosing that, because as soon as I disclose that, there's gonna be Filipinos. There's gonna be people who I've never met in like 10, 15 years. And be like, "Hey, Chris, I have a family member who needs this," and like,
if you're a cousin twice removed,
right? It's like people start asking me for stuff. And it's like, "Oh, Chris, you got to do this." And they're like, "No, I am not doing that. I'm earning just enough for a little better off." Okay, basically what I'm trying to say.
Putting him on the spot.
Oh my gosh, people are gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm."
Now their imaginations are blowing up because you're not saying it.
I am. Oh my gosh. No. All right, so what I was trying to say is like, right now, to give you a perspective, like my mom has, this is how my mother put it. My mom has 3 jobs. She's running. I don't know how she juggles 3 jobs, or that she manages 3 kind of a jobs passively. I don't know the details about who works, but here's how she explained it to me. One of my income earns more than the middle paying tier of what she earns.
Mm-hmm.
So like she earns more than me, but like if she was to take just one of them, I would have been earning more than her. And she's been in the work field much longer than I have. Mm-hmm. And when she started out, she and my dad didn't have anything. They lived in a small house. They did not have a washing machine. They did not have a fridge. They did not have. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a lot of stuff, and they basically didn't have a more decent house until I was born. And I can imagine. Yeah, I'm the blessing maker here. Like, you should be thanking me. This is why I should be the favorite child. Mom, if you're listening to this, you ought to know that I brought the blessing to your household. Like you're. My sister is going to hate that, but like the reason it's much better. And if I think about it, I've started off better. I'm able to get my clothes washed. I don't hand wash for the majority of the time. My parents had to do the hand washing for the first couple of years that they were married. They didn't have a fridge. I have a fully functioning fridge. I'm able to pay the electricity. I have more than a fridge.
I have 2 fridges.
No, not like that. Not like that. Like in a sense, like I have an air fryer. I have a monitor and a desktop setup. I have a flat screen TV, which it's not.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
It's normal. Okay, I would argue it's more normal now than it is. But like back then, my parents didn't even have a TV. And I remember growing up, we didn't have a TV majority of the time. And it was basically my fault because I was like the anti-TV guy. So I'm the anti-TV guy. And my first job out of college, I have a TV, a decent flat screen TV, not too huge.
And you have an RGB microphone.
Yeah, I have a microphone that I do for podcasts, and so I'm definitely more blessed. Oh,
And
here's
you have a
another
bunch
thing.
of books behind you.
These are not real. These are not real. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. No, no, I was gonna say that I'm able to sleep with air conditioning at night because that's not a luxury that people have. And I got that because I had a hard time sleeping because I wanted to sleep well, and every time I woke up, I was dizzy, I was drowsy, and I was waking up with all kinds of stuff, all kinds of headaches. My point being is that I was so much better off than how my parents were before. The life that I live is basically pretty good. It is really really good, and I treat this every time. I am always grateful for this. I tell Heavenly Father that I'm very grateful that I'm in this situation, and I'm very grateful that I am not much in want or in longing. I'm not doing this to brag to people. I'm doing this to showcase to people that there I'm hoping that what I'm doing is to tell people that I live a pretty good life, and I try not to splurge unnecessarily. I treat this as, if I compare it to the Bible, I treat this as my 7 years of plenty. And I know that this is not normal. I expect that at some point I will go down in poverty, and I'm trying to prepare for that. I don't have a car like some people that I know of, and this is not inside the US, okay? US, it's like a basic necessity to have a car, right? In the
Um,
Philippines,
yeah.
yeah, it's in the Philippines. If you have a secondhand car, it's pretty much a privilege. And if it's not like if and unless it's one of those like jeepneys or those multi-cabs that you built yourself, but like if you bought a secondhand car, you're pretty privileged. I don't have a car. I don't have a car. I don't want to get a car. I don't. I try and limit the number of time. I feel guilty every time I eat out. I try and
Mm.
cook at home as much as I want. Like I try and limit that, and I try and limit the number of clothes that I have. Most of the clothes that I have were from what I fit into my two suitcases when I came back from Hawaii, which is not a lot. And then half my clothes, more than half my clothes were clothes that were passed down or given to me. Like someone else bought them for me. I didn't buy clothes for myself. And I have a phone. Like I have a phone and I bought it like new. But
Dang,
yeah,
fancy.
but that was after that was after my other phone broke. And my laptop is basically I have a laptop that work gave me, and have a laptop that the one I've used throughout school. And my things that I have, the things that I have, like I don't, I I try basically to avoid buying stuff. And every time I
Mhm.
buy stuff, I have to think like, okay, if all of this were to end in 3 years and I have to move out, would I still be bringing X, Y, and Z? So I
Mhm.
try and minimize the things that I basically have. I don't splurge it. Once in a while it feels good for me to treat friends out because that makes me happy. It makes me happy to see that we're able to spend time together and that we're able to have a good time together. That's what I find what was worth spending on. But I try not to splurge. I feel bad that I spend more than 50% of if I spend more of my than 50% of my income for like expenses and wants combined, and I don't save 50% of it. I already feel guilty and I feel bad because I treat it as my 7 years plenty that I ought to be saving and preparing for the future.
Mhm. So it sounds like you made active decisions whenever you have to buy anything. So,
Right.
what would your advice be to get to a somewhat similar situation as yourself? It feels as though like there you had certain blessings that maybe other people did not have. But
Mhm.
I mean, what are general rules and mindsets that you think people should have to get to that level of comfort that sounds like you have right now?
Right. Well, first of all, if you're aiming for my level of comfort without putting in the work, you have to.
Or what
I
kind of work
remember.
did you put in, for example?
So
Because
yeah. So
I know
before
your
this,
story.
so the way I got this job was because I was already working a part time job. I was taking like 19 to 21 credits a semester. And aside from that part-time job, I was also doing this part-time work. I got introduced to this. They said they're looking for people who are in the finance majors who want to do equity research for this company, and they were gonna pay you, which is they paid you a fair amount. And so on top of everything that I was doing of studying and trying to get good grades, and at the time, I'm also trying to basically provide for myself and what do you call this? And also try to work part time. I'm also doing this other job that I had. And because of this other job, that opened up to the opportunities of being able to work remotely as an equity researcher from the Philippines. And and I would say that it was not so much because I was lucky. Yes, it was I was yes, people introduced this opportunity to me, but they would not recommend me for this project if they knew that I was not someone who worked hard, who gave my all, who tried to do his best in everything. They saw me as someone who basically was willing to put in the effort, was and I had to put that effort for before this opportunity came. I had to work on this other project for like 2 years. 2 years I've had to prove myself before people said, "Chris, we have this opportunity. We think you should take it." And even when that opportunity came, that was like the opportunity before where I was right now. So hard work, luck is there's a segment of luck where it's really lucky, where you're born or where you have this fortune that you didn't work for. But I would say that a majority of luck happens because it was basically your hard work that's met with the opportunity. I always pray for opportunities. I don't pray for things to happen to me. Whenever I pray for certain things to happen for a certain result that I want, I always know deep in my mind that I would pray for to have the strength and the endurance to do the things that I need to so that I get the results that I want. That is basically what I tell people all the time. You're not it's not luck, it's hard work. I don't know
It's
why people have a
preparation.
hard time yeah, it's preparation. I don't know why people have such a hard time grasping that. And here's the other thing, like if you prepare 100%, if you prepare all your life, then you don't really have the need to worry. It's baffling it baffles me that people don't understand that very simple concept, and they splurge like there's no tomorrow. I've had friends who were from the Philippines who spent like there was no tomorrow. I'm like, you came from a much harder working household than I did. I don't know why you're spending your income this much. And with the recent controversy that I've heard, like
What's a
there were a lot of
controversy?
people like in university, there were people who would take 2 3 more jobs, but they didn't have as much savings as I had, which is
Hmm.
crazy to me. Like you work harder than I do. I don't know where is your money going. I had a bike that I bought for $10. When that broke down, I started walking. I never bought another bike. I never tried to repair it. I just walked wherever I went. And so it baffles me that people are able to buy like electric scooters all the time. It's like, where do you get the money? That's like $200 on what salary?
Sounds
Gosh.
like scholarships.
It's not just that I had scholarships as well, but I never spent $200 on an electric scooter. No. Well, first of all, I'm overweight, and I thought the exercise would be good, pretty good. That was a reason for me.
I think it would just depend, but like, yeah, I think so. In the United States, anyways, the three guidelines for one to at the eventually become middle class is graduate high school, um, don't have kids until you're married, and get a job.
Really? That's middle class?
Well, that's you'll eventually get to middle class. That generally
Wow.
speaking, that's the three guidelines that one can become middle class. Um, and really, when you start thinking about it, even with those that don't believe per se in like certain religious aspects, like the Ten Commandments, uh, and just having that a truer understanding helps build your preparation, and then that preparation gives you that opportunity to then have, to have a more impactful life, I guess. And that's just really interesting when you were mentioning all those different things in university. I mean, an example of what I did was like maybe get a longboard if you need to go from point A to point B a bit faster, or bike or longboard. And I'm not sure about, maybe $10 is a bit too cheap, but like maybe for example, I think I got like a longboard for like 60, used it
Yeah,
for
which
like
is still pretty good.
a semester or two, and then sold it at like maybe 50. So for a whole semester, it's like the same as you. It's like I paid, let's say, overall $10, but then it didn't break.
Right.
So I think there's that aspect that you got to make sure the quality's okay before buying it.
It's true. And I also I see people with
Or
I see
cars,
people
actually. Cars can be
yeah,
something like that.
cars. So how do people afford cars when they're in college? I could get the people who get support from their parents. That's another thing that baffles me.
Well,
There
I
are
think with the
domestic
scholarship
students.
stuff, and me being a U.S. citizen, I didn't have the big scholarship that almost everybody else has, but I got something similar to it. I would consider it the United States iWork scholarship, let's say.
Right.
And with that was able to help. You're able to save to get a vehicle, but then at the same time, it's the understanding that, let's say, for example, you got a vehicle for 3,000. You're able to practically sell it for around the same price, if like plus minus $300. So at the low end, let's say you had a vehicle overall you spent like $300 on it, and then you're able to sell it to somebody else, or you could even profit somehow, some way. And so there's that understanding about it, just like the longboard example, but a bigger vehicle, I guess.
Right. I think when looking at our conversation right now, I think gratitude has a lot to play into people's success, because gratitude it makes you realistic, and it keeps you humble of your situation, that you're still teachable. But at the same time, I think there is a correlation between gratitude and aspiration.
Well,
When
sorry, keep going, keep going.
No, like when you tend to be grateful, and when you tend to treasure what you have, you you're able to acknowledge it, and you're able to kind of work harder towards preserving it. Like, for example, if you're grateful for your family, like the idea that comes to my mind is that if you're grateful to have kids, and you're grateful to have a family, and you
Oh.
love them very much, you'd do everything you'd have this ambition to be able to treat them better, and to be able to do these other fantastic things together, which would want you to earn more, so that you can be able to do that. I think there's a lot of links to how that works, and
Oh yeah.
basically it all makes sense to me.
So something interesting is how, for example, a single male, like
Right.
whatever age range, let's say whatever they're making, if there's a male of that same age range that is married, generally speaking, they're actually making more, or if they have kids. And I think part of that, like you were mentioning, is that ambition. And sometimes we need people or other things to kind of push us, because we do get comfortable
Mm.
in those situations. Like maybe if you're just single, then you're content with what you have, so then you're not as ambitious into doing X, Y, and Z. But which is, at the same time, there's nothing wrong with that. But then we're almost equating gratitude with being religious. How do you explain people that are not religious but are also successful?
So that's one thing, though. I don't think gratitude is basically tied to any religion. I think it's just I think in our religion, especially, we are taught that gratitude is a Christ-like attribute. And say you don't believe in Christ, that doesn't mean that you are still not capable for gratitude. I think that I think it still comes down to appreciation, and I still think it comes down to being able to have the intelligence and the open-mindedness to see that you truly are blessed, or that you are given things. You can still be grateful for things that you didn't work hard for. For example, the house that you live in, if it's been paid for by your parents or it was worked hard for by your grandparents, then you ought to be grateful to them. It's not necessarily that you have to be, if you're not religious, I don't think those people necessarily per se would be directly grateful to God, but if they don't believe in God, but they're still grateful for a power or influence that was able to lead to these current events that they acknowledge is not normal. The first step to be able to have gratitude is to acknowledge and to have the open mindedness that this is not the normal, and to be able to have that level of open mindedness, which would mean that you have to be a very observant kind of a person, and those tendencies, like observant kind of people, tend to be very, very successful in life. There's a correlation for it, but I don't think so it would be a causation, but there's some correlation to it.
Yeah, I think I mean, you don't necessarily need to be Christian to be to have gratitude. I think
No.
rather it's at the same time, like if somebody doesn't believe in something, that doesn't mean that, like, there's a reality of being a human with the understanding where you came from
Right.
helps propel you to become who you need to be. Um, but yeah, I think we've kind of talked on about this level of gratitude and how that would affect our lives, I guess, on how
Yeah.
to continue moving forward. Uh, if you can name, what are the, like, let's kind of make a list. What would you say is your top 5 things that you're most grateful for?
Top 5 things I'm grateful for, right at the top of my head. I'm able to live in a decent house. I'm able to
Housing.
live. Yeah. Um, I pray for this every night. I thank Heavenly Father that despite having a corrupt government where everyone's benefits are being taken away, it it affects, it doesn't affect me as much. I'm able to safeguard myself. I'm grateful for people that I'm able to connect with. I've had people that I was able to connect to in a more personal level than I did before, and every day I'm grateful for those people. I'm grateful that I'm able to develop these skills. I've seen, looking back to before I went to BYU Hawaii and after BYU Hawaii, I've learned that I made a lot of growth, and I'm also, like, lastly, I'm very, very grateful to my mother, especially. I've understood more the sacrifice that it took to raise us, and I've understood more that she is not a perfect being, but that she did try her best. It's kind of like a paradox. The more I see the flaws in her parenting, the more I appreciate her, because you really see that she was trying to give you everything. And I tell her that all the time, and I try and remember that all the time. Now that's my 5 things for me. You?
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for my wife, housing as well, job, family, and friends.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
standard stuff.
Wow. I gave a very, a very
Well,
well
I
versed.
think also, like, just like another something more unique about it is my upbringing, that I was able to able to immigrate from the Philippines to the U.S., and I have memories and recollections of
Right.
those times. So then I could compare and contrast, because I remember even in elementary and just talking to people is just like, having that, seeing that those things where, like, maybe a kid is crying because they can't get a toy. I'm like,
Right.
I've never even remotely thought about even like being in that level of mindset. Like, that to me is like so spoiled. And like, this was at a really young age, or like never really asking too much, or like trying to, like, bankrupt your parents because you want X, Y, and Z, and having that reality check, I guess, of keeping your wants realistic. And like, that doesn't mean to just kind of give up, but
Right.
that, as well as having a better mature understanding of where, like, of how money affects things, as well as like religious aspects of it.
Right.
And so that was very helpful. I always having that anchor to kind of remind myself on where I have seen being in the Philippines where at certain points in time, like people didn't have toilet paper. And it's like, okay. And
Oh
to
gosh.
now where it's like, okay.
Yeah.
There's
You
just a
are
lot more
living the
stuff.
Filipino dream. Like there are a lot of like
Oh yeah.
every Filipino wishes to move to the States and be able to have permanent residency there. And there's only very a small percentage who are able to start a family in the US who came from the Philippines. So you're living the Filipino
Yeah.
dream, which is
I
also the
know.
American dream.
And with that, right? Like, so no matter what happens, and we mentioned this before, but we didn't say it here, where you are the 1% of the world if you make more than like 33K a year.
Hmm.
And 33K in the United States is almost like minimum wage, like
Right.
or like $15
Not
an hour.
even minimum wage. Like, I thought the minimum wage that I
Well,
saw
actually,
somewhere
it's
was like
actually minimum
50K.
wage is actually less, but like generally speaking, you should be able to get a job. Generally
Right.
speaking, that pays around
Gosh.
$15 an hour, um, and like
So
that's
you're
being
in
the
you're
one
you're in
percent.
the world you're in the world's top 1%. I'm not.
And
To all my friends out
yeah,
there, ask the Shown guy for money. He's in the 1% of the world.
it's just one of those things where like so the standards of the world is so vastly different from the standards of the United States that even like low middle class in the United States is top 1% of the world. And so there's that level of gratitude that I haven't actually having experienced it. Like I know that it's true. It helps ground me, if anything.
All right. Well, that's a good way to end this. I think I don't have anything else to say. And yeah, thanks everyone. That's the pod for today.
Yeah, thank you.